These mountains are home to many legends, religious traditions, and spiritual practices. Thousands of years ago, meditation was perfected here, and until recently, the focused or concentrated mind that is meditation was exclusively thought of as a religious practice. Thanks in part to the work of Herbert Benson, M.D., the Mind-Body Medical Institute Associate Professor of Medicine at Harvard Medical School, meditative techniques are among the most popular mind-body practices entering everyday life in the West today. Based on his studies of transcendental meditation in the early 1970s, Dr. Benson later described what he called the relaxation response, a physiological state of deep relaxation. While originally used successfully to reduce the effects of stress and to decrease the often associated high blood pressure, the relaxation response was also proven an effective treatment for managing a multitude of stress-related disorders. Once he established that Western subjects were capable of producing widespread positive effects on physical and psychological functioning through simple meditation, Dr. Benson found his interest redirected toward the advanced meditators of the East. If evoking the relaxation response could bring about quantifiable changes among Western subjects, Benson wanted to know what kind of physiological changes advanced meditators were capable of. In order to find advanced meditators who would be appropriate research subjects, Dr. Benson's team combed the literature, and there, the work of Alexandra David Neal at the turn of the last century caught their attention. In her book, Magic and Mystery in Tibet, David Neal had revealed to the public for the very first time the existence of Tummo meditation. Of particular interest was the following passage.
The neophytes sit on the ground, cross-legged and naked. Sheets are dipped in icy water. Each man wraps himself in one of them and must dry it on his body. As soon as a sheet has become dry, it is again dipped in the water and placed on the novice's body to be dried as before. The operation goes on in that way until daybreak. Then he who has dried the largest number of sheets is declared the winner of the competition.
Now here was something not only visually remarkable, it was also measurable. Unfortunately, it was also a guarded secret. David Neal had made it clear that Tummo was a ritual practice not meant for public display. To observe it herself, she had to first disguise herself as a monk, and even then be a little secretive to catch a glimpse. So if Dr. Benson were indeed to study Tummo meditation, he would have to somehow obtain special dispensation from the Dalai Lama. A year of discussions ensued.
Yes, as you mentioned, these is a practice usually regarded as a secret doctrine and also very private thing. But I feel, as usually I believe and also explain to people that we are believing or emphasis on reasons and facts rather than just a faith. So you see, for my own interest, or my own knowledge, or I would like to make this sort of experiment according through scientific means. If you see something true, something fact, then the investigation taken through meditation and investigation taken through instrument may reach same point. So this is main reason I thought might be advisable.
The negotiations turned on the fact that the Dalai Lama was looking to reach out to non-Buddhists by putting, as he said, emphasis on reasons and facts, not just faith. In February of 1981, Dr. Benson's research team made its first expedition to Dharamsala, northern India. Since no one knew quite what to expect, The experiments were designed to be as portable and yet as complete as possible. Not only was it important to measure body temperature, the team also needed to take into consideration such things as diet and food intake, as well as the influence of environmental factors. This black globe is a thermometer sensitive to radiant heat. It establishes ambient air temperature. For most of the early experiments, ambient temperature hovered in the high 50s to lower 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Establishing wet and dry bulb temperatures measures relative humidity. In order to gauge heat output, the team devised a system of 5 lightweight thermistors which were applied to different positions on the body: forehead, navel, arm, little finger, and big toe. These thermistors were then connected to a measuring device. A simple switching mechanism permitted the selection and separate measurement of all 5 inputs utilizing a single meter. There was also a rectal thermometer to continually chart rectal temperature. This approach was carried on before, during, and after the practice of tumo in order to give pre-meditation, meditation, and post-meditation comparisons. These 6 positions yielded data covering a range of surface skin temperature as well as rectal temperature.
For the purpose of our measurements, would your heat be more just before the bliss comes about?
Just to establish things,
Right.
the heat that was generated today is a heat that is capable of inducing the bliss consciousness.
Yes, I understand. So let me recoup. This was a very good Dumo meditation with the fires appropriately ignited, but to turn the corner
With the winds
with the wind,
nicely coming together and all.
right, the rectal probe interfered.
Right.
Okay.
As valuable as that rectal probe was to science, everyone was sensitive to the monk's distress. It had to be pretty tough to focus on the spiritual while so distracted by the mechanical. Once it was established in multiple experiments that there was no increase in core temperature during tumo, all future use of the probe was abandoned, to everyone's relief. Alexander David Neil acknowledges in Magic and Mystery in Tibet that there are several types of tumo practice, but that only one of them involves drying of the sheets. By this point, it was very clear to everyone that drying of the sheets was indeed a very uncommon form of this meditation. Nevertheless, representatives of His Holiness the Dalai Lama were emphatic that drying of the sheet ceremonies did still occur, but that they were indeed rare events. In the context of watching these experiments, and in order to fully understand the remarkable features of tumo, one should keep in mind some of the basic laws of human physiology. We human beings must maintain our body temperature. Enzymes or biochemical reactions are optimal at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, but the human body can function well enough through a fairly wide range of temperature. However, when the surrounding temperature falls below a certain critical point, humans have learned to conserve body heat, and our first line of defense is to wear additional clothing, ultimately dressing in furs and down jackets. Animals have it easier. They simply grow more fur. Beyond putting on more clothes, what the human body does naturally is decrease the amount of heat loss in our hands, toes, feet, ears, and nose by vasoconstriction, lowering blood flow to the extremities and thus conserving heat for the body's essential features, the heart, lungs, and brain. Humans will even sacrifice fingers and toes to frostbite if that's what it takes to stay alive. Human bodies can also produce additional heat. The way we do this is by working the furnaces of our bodies, our skeletal muscles. We shiver. After we shiver, we jump up and down. That shivering and jumping produce heat. and heat helps us survive. These Tummo monks are functioning according to a different set of rules. In a cool to cold environment, and in a state of relaxation where skin temperature would normally be going down, just the opposite is happening. The team observed increases in fingers and toes of 16 to 17 degrees Fahrenheit. The endeavor to describe these different rules drives much of Dr. Benson's research. Of course, he's been careful to focus on documentable claims. This brings us back to the work of Alexandra David Neil. Readers familiar with magic and mystery in Tibet will know that David Neil displays considerable cynicism about the existence of a supernatural realm. In fact, it's her detachment that makes her tales all the more convincing. So it was that her descriptions of the Tibetan practice of Lungom also drew considerable interest. Once again, reading from David Neil.
Under the collective term of Longam, Tibetans include a large number of practices which combine mental concentration with various breathing gymnastics and aim at different results, either spiritual or physical. Though the effects ascribed to Longam training vary considerably, the term Longam is especially used for a kind of training which is said to develop uncommon nimbleness and especially enables its adepts to take extraordinarily long tramps with amazing rapidity.
This too sounded visually remarkable, perhaps even measurable, and Dr. Benson eventually secured permission to study Lungom. It seems, however, that Lungom as practiced today does not go beyond the breathing gymnastics referred to by David Neil. Benson and his team continued with scientific measurements. In fact, they were very happy with the data collected up to this point, but the image of monks drying wet sheets just wouldn't go away. Could it be seen? Could it be studied? The quest led the team to Rumtek Monastery near Gangtok in Sikkim. Although the monks at this monastery were part of a separate tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, the so-called Red Hats, and thus not directly under the aegis of the Dalai Lama, His Holiness had intervened to gain access for Dr. Benson and his researchers. But to their surprise and disappointment, this celebration turned out to be mostly symbolic. It celebrated the energy of Tummo practitioners, but did not demonstrate their actual prowess. Dr. Ralph Goldman used an infrared surface temperature monitor and determined that some radiant heat could be detected, but that it was not in the range of earlier findings. The monk's spokesperson explained it away this way. Extreme heat is not necessary. These monks are drying dry sheets. As it turned out, the research and filming of Tummo at Rumtek was a very sensitive issue. According to the head Lama, Tummo's long secret nature would remain a secret, at least at his monastery. The team did, however, receive permission to study a Tummo meditator, but not to measure heat output. Instead, they were allowed to measure brain waves with an electroencephalogram and to calculate oxygen consumption. In a startling development, the brainwave tracings indicated that instead of being in a slow, calm alpha state, which had been observed in meditators in the West, this monk showed a marked asymmetry in alpha and beta wave activity between hemispheres. That's to say, one part of his brain was in calm meditation, while the other hemisphere showed a more active beta state, a state of high mental stimulation. This was very unusual. But as if that weren't enough, while his brain waves showed asymmetry, both hyperactivity and tranquility, measurements of his oxygen output had everyone worried.
When we started, we felt there was a leak in the face mask. Both doctors Malhotra and Goldman felt that the oxygen consumption, the air put out which was measuring oxygen consumption, was so low that there must be a leak because the bag collecting the expired air wasn't filling up. And we checked the face mask and checked the face mask, but indeed, even sitting quietly, his oxygen consumption, the rate of his body producing energy was so decreased, he was effectively stopping breathing. And then when he went into meditation, it got even deeper. So instead of a 10 or 12 minute collection, to get enough air, we had to go 20, 30 minutes. And suddenly we were able to see that although we weren't measuring tumo, we were finding that these monks in their stabilization meditation were producing required so little energy that it was a remarkable finding in its own right.
It was established that during his stabilization meditation, there was a decrease in metabolism of 64% from rest. Never before had such a decrease been documented. Decreases in metabolism during sleep have been seen in the range of 10 to 15%. In simple meditation, around 17%. 64% is truly remarkable. In January 1985, Dr. Benson received a call from a representative of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The connection was very bad, and the person on the other end of the line spoke very little English. Yet the message was clear. There were soon to be two very special events taking place near Manali and in Ladakh. It was a pre-production scramble, but the team made it to the Kulu Valley near Manali on the appointed day. And this is what they found. These monks had been studying with a master practitioner. You may recognize him and his principal disciple from some of the earlier experiments. They had come to prove their proficiency as tumo practitioners, a competition almost exactly as Alexander David Neil had observed nearly a century ago. This is what the team had been longing to observe and study.
Now, while you see practicing tumu, now you see drying, what do you call, the sheet. Now this sort of, whether you see that person qualified or not. So you see, there is something, a form of you see, experimenting. Once you see, we practice. So there are, you see, different method or different way to examine one's own, you see, inner practice. So that is the one of the practice.
For His Holiness, it may well have been nothing more than a different way to examine one's inner practice. But for Dr. Benson's team, it was akin to finding the Holy Grail. The room's temperature at the beginning of this ceremony was 40 degrees Fahrenheit, just a few degrees above freezing. The water temperature was 49 degrees Fahrenheit, and the sheets measured approximately 3 by 6 feet. Most people exposed to these conditions would almost immediately go into uncontrolled shivering, their bodies desperately trying to generate heat. Yet shivering would not be enough, and body temperatures would continue to drop, and under some circumstances, death could result. Yet the monks, through their tumo practice, were not only able to maintain body temperature, they somehow increased it. And soon, it was apparent what they were capable of doing. Alexander David Neil never reported seeing steam. The master checks for dryness, for proficiency of inner practice. Over the period of several hours, each monk was required to dry 3 sheets. But before that, the entire room filled with the water vapor evaporated through the generation of inner heat, the practice of tumo.
Now, once you develop the such power to control inner element, then it can control external element, four elements. So now, then you see, through that way, you could, if you see, you have good training, then you could perform these, you may call this a miracle.
At a monastery near 15,000 feet in early February 1985, the night of the midwinter's full moon, the night that Tibetans regard as the coldest of the year, the team was invited to document the ceremony of Rei-Pyu. These monks had spent the previous year in retreat in order to prepare for this test. They set out for a ledge higher yet above the monastery where they planned to spend the night. During the night, the temperature would reach a low of 0 degrees Fahrenheit. All the monks had to protect themselves from the cold were light cotton and woolen shawls. Yet the monks showed no concern for the harsh conditions. They promptly fell asleep and slept until dawn. The bottom line? No one knows where this energy is coming from. None of the calculations can come up with enough energy to stay alive and to do so without shivering. None of the calculations can come up with enough energy to dry icy wet sheets in 40-degree Fahrenheit rooms, or enough energy to stay alive all night at 0 degrees Fahrenheit without shivering. This is a truly remarkable mind-body interaction, where a religiously or spiritually based event can generate a heat that cannot be fully understood. While modern technology could possibly lead to some breakthrough in understanding, it's also quite possible that science may never be able to understand, in Western terms, where the energy comes from. Nevertheless, it's Dr. Benson's hope that future studies will allow him and his colleagues to define where that heat is coming from, and ultimately to understand how spiritual mind-body interactions can lead to such dramatic results.